let's see the grammar constructs that GMAT favors in sentence correction. There are some questions that come with a lot of takeaways, and this is one of those questions. It's a little tricky, so let's look at it in detail today. According to scientists who monitored its path, so the sentence begins with a prepositional modifier. This is an attributive tag. What do we mean by that? That means it tells us the source of the information. So whatever information that is going to follow, this was given to us by the scientists, according to scientists. Now we can put this attributive tag either at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of the sentence or even in the middle. So for example, if we say according to scientists, A is responsible for B, right? For B. Now we can say according to scientists, A is responsible for B, or we can say A is responsible for B according to scientists, or we can say A, according to scientists, over here in the middle, is responsible for B, right? So then we can attribute either in the beginning or at the end or even in the middle, it doesn't matter. It is a parenthetical expression. That means that if we remove this entire thing, then the structure of the sentence stays the same. There is no impact on the structure of the sentence. It gives us just additional information. Yeah. All right. So let's start with the main clause now. No, first of all, notice another thing, that there is a pronoun over here who monitored its path. So these scientists monitored the path of something. Yeah. So now what does it stand for? It should, since it is it's a pronoun in the beginning of the sentence in a modifier, after the comma, after this comma that we have, it should refer to the subject appearing of the main clause right after the comma. Ideally, it should refer to this particular subject, whatever we are talking about over here, the subject of the main clause that follows this modifier. Okay, so what is the main clause? An expanding cloud of energized particles ejected from the sun. Look, there are a lot of modifiers in this entire thing, right? Recently triggered a large storm. So then we know that the verb comes over here. Yeah, this recently is your adverb. Fine. This, an expanding cloud of energized particles ejected from the sun. This entire thing is our subject. Note that an expanding is a pre-modifier, modifying what? Cloud. Okay, of energized particles. Again, cloud of what? Of energized particles. It is also modifying the cloud. And particles ejected from the sun. This is also a modifier. It is modifying what? The particles, right? Ejected from the sun, the past participle modifier for particles. So that means the main subject, the main thing that we are talking about is cloud. And then all these other words, they are modifying the cloud. So according to scientists who monitored its path, here we know that it refers to this cloud. Okay, so what did this cloud do? It recently triggered a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. Fine, perfect till now. Which brightened the northern lights. Okay, now here, which, I have a comma and I have a which. So which refers to something. What does it refer to? Which brightened the northern lights and also possibly knocking out a communication satellite. So there is something that which refers to, and this thing did two things. What did it do? It brightened the northern lights and it knocked out a communication satellite. Now there are two impacts that happen. So one is the brightening of the northern lights and two is knocking out of the communication satellite. So they both should be in parallel. These need to be in parallel. All right, now what does this which refer to? Now this which could refer to this event of the cloud triggering a large storm, or it could also refer to the large storm. So we don't really know what actually brightened the northern lights and knocked out the communication satellite. All right. And another thing, notice here that we have and also is redundant over here. There are two things. The brightening of the northern lights and knocking out of the communication satellite, we can just join them with and. We don't need to give this and also. This is not ideal. Yeah. So then certainly some issues with option A. So let's eliminate it. We also have and also over here. Again, it's not a reason for us to eliminate, but certainly it makes it less than ideal. So we'll see what happens. What about any other option? Well, no, I don't see it in any other option. All right, let's look at option B in detail now. An expanding cloud of energized particles ejected from the sun. This is fine. Again, this entire thing is our subject. And as we said, the cloud is what it's refers to over here, this it's. So that's fine. Now, this was what triggered a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. This is very indirect. It is not something that GMAT will prefer. It is not something that formal language will prefer, right? You would say that A triggered B, right? You will not say A was what triggered B. That becomes really indirect. So then again, then this is not ideal. All right. So was what recently triggered a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth, and it brightened the northern lights and also possibly knocked out a communications satellite. Now, what does this it refer to? Well, it should ideally refer to the cloud, right? This, because again, this is a main clause. This an expanding cloud of energized particles. It's an independent clause, and this and it brightened the northern lights and also possible. This is also an independent clause, and the two independent clauses are joined by a comma and a conjunction, which is fine. So, but then this it's a pronoun. It should, we don't know which noun it refers to now because of the structure, the role that it plays in the grammatical structure of this particular clause, of this clause. It plays the role of the subject over here. So then by that logic, it should play the role of the subject in the previous clause as well. The it that it refers to should also be the subject of the previous clause. Now the subject of the previous clause is what? Cloud. So then ideally then it should refer to the cloud. The cloud brightened the northern lights and also possibly knocked out a communication satellite. And the point over here is that we are talking about the cloud triggering a large storm, and it is this event which seems to have brightened the northern lights, etc. Right? So that is why then this is again, not the best answer. It is again not very ideal. So we need to eliminate this also. This is also not good. Couple of issues with it. Okay, look at C. An expanding cloud of energized particles ejected from the sun recently triggered a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. Okay, again, my cloud is the subject, perfectly good. And it recently triggered a large storm, perfectly good. Brightening the northern lights and possibly knocking out a communication satellite. Now, what is this? This is a comma plus a present participle at the end of the clause, which often gives us the cause effect. That is, your main clause will give you the cause, and the comma plus a present participle, this brightening is a present participle, right? There are two present participles here, modifiers, brightening and knocking. They are both in parallel, and they give us the effect of what happened in the main clause, which is that the cloud triggered a large storm in the magnetic field. So this event led to the brightening of the northern lights, etc. Well, now it makes perfect sense. Now, keep in mind that for cause-effect relations, where an event is responsible for certain effect, GMAT does prefer to use the comma plus present participle at the end of the clause structure. Then another structure that GMAT likes to use is the noun plus modifier. So, for example, it could have said, this cloud triggered a large storm, comma, a phenomenon that brightened the northern lights. Yeah. So a phenomenon or an event. So let's say it could be A triggered B, an event that did something. So here you have a comma, you have an event, which is a noun. So it renames what happened over here. You could use an event or a phenomenon, and noun plus a modifier. This is a that modifier, that did this and this, right? So this is another structure that GMAT prefers. It could either be a present, if it is a cause effect, then normally GMAT prefers a present participle, comma plus a present participle at the end of the sentence structure. But this one could also have been used, the noun plus modifier one. All right. So as such, there are no issues that I could see with C. So of course, let's put it on the side. Now, a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. Now here it's of a sentence. According to scientists who monitored its path, this it stands for a large storm, because now this is the subject of the main clause, which appears immediately after the comma over here. So according to scientists who monitored its path, a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. So then, well, seems that the scientists could be monitoring the path of a large storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth. Fine, possible. Comma, recently triggered by an expanding cloud of energized particles. So now this is a parenthetical expression, recently triggered by an expanding cloud of energized particles. It is telling us how the storm came into being. No issues over there. It's quite possible that this was triggered by an expanding cloud. It could have been triggered, let's say, a few weeks ago or a few days ago, and then once it was triggered, the scientists have been monitoring the path of this storm. No worries. Now, this large storm brightened the northern lights. Okay, so now this, as we said, is a parenthetical expression, this recently triggered by an expanding cloud. So we can remove it to look at the structure of option D. So what is the structure of option D? It talks about a large storm. So we are talking about the storm now. Storm is our subject. And the storm brightened the northern lights. Now, brightened is our verb over here. Brightened the northern lights, and it possibly knocked out a communication satellite. Look, we don't need to use it over here. It creates some kind of ambiguity, and it possibly, it possibly knocked out. When we are saying that the storm did two things, we said those two impacts, they are in parallel. The storm brightened the northern lights, and we should say possibly knocked out a communications satellite. Right? We don't have to use an it over here. The moment we use an it over here, it creates ambiguity. Of course, we would say that it perhaps refers to the storm only, or it is a pronoun. It could refer to another noun which is close by. And there are other nouns which are close by, right? We said that the storm in the magnetic field that surrounds Earth recently triggered an expanding cloud. Okay, even if we remove this, brightened the northern lights, and it possibly, now, are we talking about the northern lights? Are we talking about the storm? So why to do that, right? This is not ideal. Again, this is not appropriate. Again, when there is one subject and it is performing two actions, we should write just A did B and C. As simple as that. We should not say A did B and it did C. Doesn't make sense, right? Okay, so then again, since we have a better option, since we have a great option in C where there is no problem, we should eliminate D as well. Let's look at option E, a large storm again. So our storm becomes the subject of the main clause, and this is what it refers to in our attributive tag over here. Okay, a large storm in the magnetic field surrounding Earth was recently triggered by an expanding cloud of energized particles. All right, so now the main purpose, the main clause tells us that a large storm was recently triggered by an expanding cloud of energized particles, brightening the northern lights, and it possibly knocked out a communication satellite. Now, multiple problems, of course. Here we have brightening, we have a present participle after a comma. So, but then, and it possibly knocked, now, and possibly knocking out, because these two need to be in parallel, right? We said these two need to be in parallel. They are not. So certainly this is not correct. Also, we have an it over here, which is not required. It is incorrect. These two are not in parallel. It possibly knocked out has become an entire independent clause, whereas this brightening the northern lights, it is a present participle modifier. We've connected them with it. They are but with and but they're not. These two are not parallel. But we said that these two need to be in parallel. So certainly enough problems over here. Option A is not correct. But logically also, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because when we say a large storm was recently triggered by an expanding cloud of energized particles, this is our main clause, this is the main information that we are giving, then according to scientists who monitored its path, we can't say that the scientists were monitoring the path of the large storm, right? The large storm was recently triggered by an expanding cloud. So then what were they monitoring? They couldn't have been monitoring the storm, because it was recently triggered only. So they could have been monitoring the cloud instead. So that is why it doesn't work over here in option C. But in option D, note that it is not a problem. It works in option D. And why? Because here, this recently triggered by an expanding cloud is just an aside. Yeah, this gives us some additional information about the large storm. It is not the main purpose of the clause, of the main clause. It just tells us that this storm came into being recently. That recently could be even a month ago. It doesn't matter. But the scientists could have been tracking the large storm. But then when the main purpose, the main intent of the main clause becomes that that it is telling us that this large storm was recently triggered, right? Then we cannot say, according to scientists who monitored its path, right? Then we have to talk about what the large storm did after it was triggered, because that is what the scientists were monitoring. They were not monitoring the event of the trigger, right? So that is why option E doesn't really work out accuracy wise either. So in any case, as we said, C is the best option over here, and that is the answer. So it's certainly a hard one, but I hope you understand it now. So till next time.